Hello and welcome, I'm DrHamfist, and we are going to be covering the Priest today, because we've hit every starter class, we're into the unlockables. The Priest is the easiest class to unlock. To unlock the Priest, go to your town vendor, you'll need to unlock tier 2, and then you can purchase the Chapel. The first rank of the Chapel will unlock the Priest. You can unlock further ranks of the Chapel, but you only need Chapel 1 to unlock the Priest class. Now let's check them out in a dungeon. Alright, so taking a look at the Priest starting skills. The left click here fires a small area of effect attack. It always detonates very close to you and has no travel time. It just instantly is there. It also fires pretty quickly, so this is a decent amount of damage even while moving. You can move very slowly while spamming it, but it does a ton of damage in an area, so it's actually very useful. And then the second skill, the right click here, it's a channel. You have to hold it down. It fires this zapping laser thing. It will not pierce enemies. It will only damage the first enemy it hits. It does decent damage, and the one reason you might use it on enemies is that it does have a pretty good range compared to your left clicks. You know, a bit over double range, I would say. If you're playing with any friends, that beam will heal allies, and it will shoot through allies to continue to then hit an enemy. So that ability is definitely much better in a group. The one case I might consider busting that out if you're playing solo is if you're trying to hit especially ranged elites or just a large pack of ranged mobs that you don't want to try to get too close to. And the important thing to understand about that right click is you can actually move while using it. It took me a shamefully long amount of time to figure that out, but you can actually move while using that. So the left click here, this is like one of the best skills in the game for killing bats. You do actually have to hit them if they get right on top of you, but the best thing to do is try to keep them like right at the max range for it. And then the skill 2 here, you can sort of run and gun with this and actually deal with ranged elites pretty well. Just like that. Now let's take a look at their full skill tree though. So, the Priest skills here. These are some pretty interesting skills, so I'm going to be careful to try to highlight some of the wackiness here. But first, the basic ones we've already seen. So, Smite. This is the left click. It will deal 8 damage at rank 1, then go to 10, and then on to 12, and then eventually at maxed 18 hybrid damage. So that doesn't sound that huge, only growing by 2 each attack, but think of it this way, you're taking it from 8 to 18, that is over double, and then at each rank where you upgrade it, the impact area will also grow. So that does 2 really meaningful things. One, it's sort of obvious, but it hits more enemies, but it does hit many more enemies because when you're growing a circle, each time you increase the radius by a certain amount, you're actually getting more and then even more on the next upgrade, mass. The first upgrade is the least, more mass by area, but then each subsequent drawing of a circle, it keeps, like the radius is squared in the formula for the area of a circle, right? So you actually end up with a ton of area and can hit many, many, many enemies when this thing is fully upgraded. So it is very, very awesome when you upgrade this. It will deal more than double damage to what it hits, and it will hit way more stuff if there's a big pile. So that is the first thing. And the second is it actually does, in a sense, increase the range of this ability. Say you're fighting the boss, you don't really care about the area of the impact, except you kind of still do. Because if you always detonate it at a certain distance from your character, but then that circle it's drawing is larger, you could be a little bit further away and you have a little bit more time to dodge any of the skills the boss is throwing at you. So it is actually a meaningful impact even against single targets because it gives you a bit more range, which is kind of the large drawback to that skill in the very first place. So I actually do recommend putting a lot of ranks into Smite. And when I was leveling up, I did put a lot of ranks into Smite. We're going to get into why I retrained and took all of my skills out of Smite, but when you're first leveling, I would actually put a lot of ranks in this. I did. It's not shown here, but I put a lot of ranks in this and I was very happy with it. Holy Light, the right click, I would not recommend putting any ranks into. You can see here, I actually have enough skill points to put only one upgrade in here, and I've chosen not to do that. Now, why? So, Holy Light, let's see, I think the first rank does 12 magical damage per second and can heal 2 of health to allies and costs 3. When you upgrade it, it will do more damage and it can heal allies more. So the first rank, I have to do a little bit of subtraction here because it shows you tier 1, which is like the first upgrade, like Holy Light 2, but Holy Light 1 isn't shown. It does 12 magical damage per 3 mana spent, and it does 2 healing per 3 mana spent. So healing of 2 for 3, it's kind of close to 1-to-1. It's not right there, but it's like, it's kind of close. And then at the fully upgraded rank, it heals 7 per 8 mana. So it's still just like approaching 1-to-1. The healing efficiency just barely moves on the needle. Like, it's not better. The one thing is it heals faster, so during a fight, it doesn't take as long to get that same efficiency of healing in, but it's not really getting you more punch for your mana, just a hair more. And when you look at damage, we're going from dealing 12 magical damage per 3 mana, which is like 4 to 1, out into 42 magical damage per 8 mana, which is about 5 per 1. So it moves a hair up, but also, again, it's really mostly just punching harder, faster, not really more efficiently. The reason I wouldn't recommend upgrading this is because it only damages one enemy at a time. So I guess it's really good into bosses. And you could do upgrades to damage bosses harder, but I would probably just dump all your upgrades into Smite, which is just so good at cleaning out packs of enemies. And then with the upgraded damage, and then with the increased range, kind of, in that tricky sense, it becomes a better tool against bosses. I would probably save the skill points. Maxing this thing out, I'm actually trying to do like quick number addition, which is just a terrible recipe for disaster. I think it's 26 total skill points here, which is a whole bunch. Why spend 26 skill points here when you could save them by just using the skill 1 and have more points for everything else, which we're about to get into. So the first ability that you can unlock is Consecrated Ground. So this will drop a small field on the ground. At rank 1, it lasts for 5 seconds. It damages enemies over time. It will deal 16 magical damage per second. And then the damage that it deals will be returned as healing to allies in that field. And it's 25% of the total damage that is dealt by the ability. I think it's only the ability, not just like any damage. This is notable for one key reason. Your skill 2 beam, the right click here, the Holy Light, this does not heal the priest himself. You can heal allies. If you're playing solo, it doesn't actually heal at all, and you don't need to look at the healing number. This can heal your allies, but only your allies. Consecrated Ground, if you stand in it, can heal you. And if you drop it right next to a corner and then run around that corner, but you make sure the circle does cover like where you'll be standing around that corner, enemies are going to get pathed into it, and then you can blow them up with your skill 1 as they're getting around the corner, but when they're walking around it, you get healing, which is awesome. And it's pretty much the way you're going to be healing yourself with skills. When you upgrade it, you get an extra half second of its duration for each upgrade, and then the damage goes up by 6 per second. So starting at 16, ending up at 40. And that does increase the healing. It doesn't increase the healing percentage. It's always 25% of the damage dealt. But since you're dealing more, it does improve the healing too. It's probably worth it to get 1 rank no matter what. And then it's kind of up to you whether or not you upgrade it further. And against really big groups, it is quite a lot of damage. It does depend how much you can keep enemies on that spot. So if you're playing in multiplayer, it's probably a bit less good because the enemies are tracking on people that aren't you and you have less control over where the enemies go. So I'd say this is probably a better skill for solo, but I'd still probably recommend taking 1 rank in it just so you can heal yourself. The final active here. This one is probably the weirdest active skill in the game. So Aura of Purification. It costs 50. It says, the priest radiates an aura that slows and lowers the damage of all nearby enemies by 30%. While the aura is active, the priest's mana regen is reduced by 90%. Do note, you don't have to keep spending the active skill mana. You have to spend that to turn it on in the first place, and then it just is on forever until you turn it off. Well, why would you turn it off? You would turn it off to get your mana regen back. This skill looks terrible at rank 1. Like reduced incoming damage by 30 on nearby enemies, so like, ranged shots might still do full, but like close enemies do 30% less and are like 30% slowed, but 90% reduction in mana regen. Well, when you upgrade it, you increase by 10% the slow and the damage reduction, and you reduce by 20% the mana regen reduction on yourself. So at the final rank, it's actually 50% and 50%. So close enemies do half damage, move half as fast, and you regenerate half the mana. So that's actually probably fine. And the way to look at this, once you've bought the blessing upgrade of increased mana regen, you could take that blessing and be like net even when this is on, because you double it and then you have it and then you're back at the same number, and then your enemies do half damage. Notably, this isn't just to you. It actually is a debuff on the enemies. So the priest will reduce the damage nearby enemies to him deal to everybody, including his teammates, which is awesome. The weird thing with this skill is it doesn't actually do any damage at all. You don't actually really activate it. You basically will turn this on and then just totally forget about it. So it's super weird. It's almost a passive, really. Next skill, now we're into the passive skills. And the first one is also super weird. So Divine Protection. This is a passive skill. It gives you a shield that will absorb 30% of incoming damage for a cost of 4 mana per damage absorbed, which is a ton. That's like a ton of mana you're going to have to pay for a pretty small damage reduction. But when you upgrade it, now it's 35, and it reduces the cost to 2 mana per damage absorbed, and then 40% reduction and 1 mana per damage absorbed, then 45 and 0.75, and then 50% reduction, and it takes half of the damage as mana. So when you read this, like if you were taking a number of damage, say 100 damage, well, 50% of that would be blocked. Of that 50% that was blocked, you would take half of that 50% into your mana. So you would take 50 health damage and 25 in damage, or like mana drain, right? If you run out of mana, it stops working, so you'll take full damage if you don't have the mana to spend to block it. So, given that, it's actually really important to avoid getting any ranks in either your skill 4 here or your first passive until you can max them. It's super weird. If you take 1 rank in this, well, now your mana regen is gone. Like, you have no mana regen. Or, if you take the first rank here, it's going to block 30% of the damage incoming. So, say you're taking 100. 30% of it will be blocked, so 30, and then you take 4 mana damage per each of those. So you take 120 mana damage. So the impact, like the amount it actually saves you, is about half, but then the mana you're spending is about like 4 or 5-fold the mana you would be spending at max rank. So I recommend not taking these skills until you later use that retrain button, which I know that looks super gold expensive, but by the time you actually want to do this, you're going to have some gold rolling around. I recommend avoiding these totally until you can max them. You don't have to go in for both at once. You could save until you could max skill 4, or save until you could max the passive. I probably, if I were playing solo, would get the passive first, and if I were playing with a team, I probably would get the aura first, because the aura helps your teammates out a lot. So don't get these early, because they're probably worse. It's probably worse to actually unlock them than it is to just not spend those points at ranks 1. Like rank 1 is probably worse than not having the skill in the first place, but once you can max them, they're actually very, very good skills, and they make the priest extremely tanky, which is good because he's like sort of melee. Next passive. I don't have any ranks in this right now because I was, shaving points everywhere I could to actually max these, 2 I just mentioned, but this is a good one. So Remedy is a passive that increases the priest's health regen from all sources. Any food pickups, any potions, obvious, any healing skills, including your own healing skills. It's only healing on you. It says the priest regains health, so it does not improve your heals for your allies, but you will heal more from consecrated ground for this, and then notably, and this will not be reflected on your character sheet, it will improve your health per second. It will also improve any vampirism you have, so if you have 2.5% lifesteal on your primary attack, because you get that blessing, well, it'll improve that too. And as you keep dumping points and ranks into this, it grows all the way up to 200% more. And 200% more means you triple the number. So you triple your health regen. And the priest is the class whose title is to give you health regen. So if you put full ranks in this, you have a ton of health regen. And once you combine that with your crazy damage reduction, you basically don't take damage because you're healing triple, and then you're taking basically like 25% damage. So if you factor that in, it's almost like you're healing for like 12 times the health per second. So it's just like crazy. I don't have the full ranks in Remedy yet, because rather than being totally unkillable, I chose to go for my favorite passive in the game, which is Celestial Orbs. I thought it was going to be Shatter Forever, but this one is just the ultimate lazy passive. So at rank 1, 2 orbs rotate around the priest that fire small beams of holy light, dealing 8 magical damage. It doesn't tell you the frequency, but I think it's like twice per second-ish, something in that range. This literally gives you little Mario Kart shells, like when you pull up like the triple shell and you have them spinning around you, guarding you. So it literally gives you Mario Kart shells that then actually are like bug zappers. And then at the max rank, you get an extra shell, so you get up to 3, which is, the full set, and then they deal 12 damage instead of 8. So this passive sort of is a replacement for you missing out on your 4th active skill, because this one is actually a passive. It's kind of weird. I feel like they almost could have just flipped these, but I guess they wanted it to be, the orbs were always guarding you, and then this one was like optional, so you wouldn't always be on damage resist mode, I guess. Because technically, if you want to fill more of a support backline role, you could always turn off Aura to have more mana to spend using long range Holy Light and like healing from the back. that is probably actually a reasonable build for a team-focused setting where you're going to be the backline healer. One thing about that is it's actually really annoying to hit your allies with Holy Light if they're moving. I'll tell you that right up front. It is very annoying to tag your allies with this skill. Now that we've covered these, let's go over blessings, because these are relatively straightforward. I'm probably going to smash cut Consecrated Ground right here, and also just the orbs, but then we'll go right into blessings. Alright, so the priest skills we hadn't seen when we were starting a brand new priest. First, the Mario Kart orbs. Look at them in all of their glory. Whenever you walk close to any enemies, they'll start zapping them. And if I walk close here, you see it looks right now like one at a time can be on them. That's not true. If you get really close, they can all activate. And yeah, that's the, if you look at the damage speed here, if I can get one orb on, that's the tick rate. So it's definitely faster than 1 per second. That's something in the area of like maybe 3 per second, I guess, kind of is what that feels like. Consecrated Ground, the first active skill, you drop it in place, and then it will damage allies, damage enemies that are in that area. And if you stand in it, you can see those little green numbers popping up are healing. So if there are more enemies, it will deal more damage and it will heal for more. So they can heal for quite a lot with a big group. And then the final active skill, which, you know, is the one that's basically a passive, you'll know it's on because you'll glow stupidly. And it will reduce your mana regen, but actually apply the slowing aura. So every time you're glowing, you actually have that passive on, slowing enemies and reducing their damage when they're near you. And you can turn it off. So it costs 50 to turn it on, and it's going to reduce your regen rate. But from there, no further cost to maintain it, so you can have it on forever. So it's pretty nice still. Now let's look at the blessings. So when the priest comes to see the preacher who unlocked him himself, I recommend doing one of two builds. So first option, decreased damage taken by 20%, because why not stack on even more damage reduction and become truly immortal? And then increase your health regen by 100%. So this affects your character sheet number, I believe. I think it actually does show it on the character sheet when you take 100% increased health regen. So this number that you double, I believe, will then later be tripled once you take the full upgrades, which becomes like 6-fold. And then when you take into account the fact that you're taking so much less damage, it becomes like 24-fold. Or I think the math with this 20% thrown in would be like 30-fold. So compared to if you didn't have any damage reduction, it didn't have any health regen bonuses, it would be like you were regenerating 30 times the health per second as far as the amount of damage that you're blocking of incoming damage. Because they're dealing so much less than normal and you're healing for so much more, and those actually compound. Like if you're generating 10 points instead of 1, but those 10 points are also going further, it's crazy. So this build becomes pretty much indestructible, and what puts it over the top is here, the Symbol of Essence, the lifesteal on primary attack. You might think this isn't that important, because the priest isn't totally a damage class, but when you're in huge mobs of enemies, you are tagging a ton of enemies with your left click because it's an area attack. And then if you upgrade it, it can do quite a bit of damage, and this lifesteal is affected by the priest passive. You do triple this number. So this actually becomes a pretty crazy source of healing. This is what I had when I was focused on my skill 1 and had that thing maxed out. Now I've sort of retrained out my skills but haven't moved my blessings around. It's actually very expensive to move your blessings. So a lot of my blessing profiles right now are still on what I built while I was leveling the toon, not me like reorganizing if I am. I might just leave it here though on the priest. The other option though would be you could get increased skill damage. This will affect the orbs. The passives are considered skills if they do damage, so your orbs will do more damage, your right click would do more damage, and then the damage that you drop on the ground would do more. The mana regen, I would probably take that over the magical damage resistance, or the resistance ignoring, right? And then at the bottom, you could either do reduces the mana cost of your skills, or you could actually look at returns 250% of damage to the attacker when hit. My understanding is this is calculated based off how much they intended to deal, regardless of how much you actually take. So if ever you were to take this on any class, it probably would be the priest. I don't know how well it would scale into like late stages of the game and like New Game Plus, because the damage numbers might still be so great you really don't want to be taking them that much. But if you were ever going to take this, you could actually use this as your third on either of those setups I would recommend. And you could mix them in here, like you could do damage reduction and then get the mana regen, and then get Symbol of Retribution. If you enjoy casting skills, and that's just more fun, then sure, you could take the damage reduction, get the mana regen rather than the bonus health regen, and then take either of those at the bottom. The priest is pretty open as far as what you could take. I just would highly recommend not taking increased primary attack damage. So let me know if you have any questions. We are going to be covering the thief and the mage next, which will complete the class guides. So we'll finish out those unlockable classes. And I've got a few other ideas going, but if there's any type of guide you'd like to see, we're wrapping up the classes. So let me know if there's anything that you want to see some help with, or just ask any questions in the comments if they're super simple. Thanks for watching. I'll see you around.